The special day that turned sour Lily had always been the type of woman who gave more than she ever asked for. Her life was defined by service, to her family, to her community, and even to her demanding career. Every day was a rush of responsibilities, preparing her children for school, making sure her elderly mother had her medications on time, juggling deadlines at work, and being the constant pillar of strength that her friends often leaned upon. People admired her resilience and called her the woman who could carry the world and still smile. But very few truly understood how exhausting it was to live each day with no pause, no moment of quiet that belonged solely to her. That was why this particular Saturday was more than just a free day. It was a rare gift, a sliver of peace that she had carved out for herself after months of planning. For once, she told herself she would not answer work emails. She would not run errands for everyone else. She would not allow herself to be distracted. This day was about her joy, her spirit, her chance to feel alive outside the labels of wife, mother, or employee. As Lily parked her car outside the Grand Mall, her heart lifted with anticipation. The building stood tall like a palace of glass and marble, gleaming beneath the sunlight as if to announce its status as the most luxurious shopping center in the city. She had driven past it many times, often with her children in the back seat or groceries waiting to be delivered home, but she had never stepped inside. Today she allowed herself that indulgence. Dressed in a flowing cream blouse and soft tailored trousers, her hair falling in curls around her face, Lily looked every bit the elegant woman she was. But more than her appearance, it was the confidence in her eyes that made her shine. She was determined that this day would belong to her. Walking through the large glass doors, Lily was instantly embraced by the ambiance. Warm golden lighting illuminated the marble floors, casting a glow that made everything shimmer. Soft classical music drifted from hidden speakers, wrapping the air with a soothing calm. Each boutique was a masterpiece, its windows designed like art exhibits with mannequins posed gracefully in gowns that looked like they belonged in royal courts. The scent of expensive perfume floated gently through the air, mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee from a cafe nearby. Lily's spirit immediately felt lighter. She wasn't just entering a shopping mall. She was stepping into another world, a sanctuary of beauty, peace, and luxury. She strolled slowly, taking her time to admire the displays. There were handbags lined like precious jewels in one shop, elegant shoes arranged in another like treasures waiting to be discovered, and racks of clothing that seemed to whisper promises of transformation. For Lily, this wasn't just about buying things. It was about reconnecting with herself, reminding herself that she too deserved to feel beautiful, powerful, and confident. Every detail of the place resonated with her inner longing. To be seen, not as someone's helper or caretaker, but as a woman worthy of admiration in her own right. After nearly an hour of browsing and enjoying the leisurely freedom, Lily's eyes fell upon a dress that seemed to command her attention. It was displayed prominently in the window of an upscale boutique, under a spotlight that made it gleam like a rare gemstone. The dress was a deep shade of blue, rich and velvety, with a sleek modern cut that suggested boldness yet carried subtle shimmering details that spoke of elegance. It was the kind of dress that could turn heads not because it screamed for attention, but because it exuded quiet power. Lily's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the very piece she had been imagining in her mind for weeks. She could already see herself wearing it at her upcoming charity event, walking into the grand hall with confidence, radiating strength and grace. The thought filled her with pure joy. Without hesitation, she stepped into the boutique, her heart racing with excitement. Inside, the store was even more luxurious. The lighting was softer here, golden spotlights highlighting each gown as if they were pieces of art in a museum. Plush carpets muffled every step, giving a sense of hushed reverence to the space. Lily reached out to touch the fabric of the blue dress, and the cool softness against her palm made her smile. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring the texture, imagining how it would feel to wear it. At that moment, she felt like a girl again, filled with dreams and possibilities. But the sweetness of her moment was quickly interrupted. A voice, smooth but carrying an edge of iciness, came from behind her. "May I help you with something?" Startled, Lily turned and found herself facing a tall, slender man with sharp features. He wore the boutique's uniform with a tie knotted so tightly it seemed to restrict him. His face was professional, but his eyes carried no warmth. They darted from Lily's face down to her attire and back up again in a sweep that made her feel not welcomed but judged. "Yes," Lily replied with a polite smile, determined not to let her mood be affected. "I was hoping to try this dress on." She gestured to the deep blue gown. "It's stunning." The salesman, his name tag read Ryan Fletcher, allowed his eyes to linger on the dress before flicking back to her with a strained smile. "That's one of our most exclusive pieces," he said. His tone was outwardly professional, but underneath it was a current of something unpleasant. "Are you certain this is the right choice for you?" Lily blinked, slightly taken aback. Was he questioning her ability to afford it? Or her right to wear it? She felt a subtle tension rise in her chest but kept her composure. "Yes," she answered firmly but politely. "I'd like to try it on." Ryan hesitated, his eyes sweeping over her once again, not with admiration but with a calculating, almost dismissive look. Lily felt as though he wasn't just evaluating her size for the dress but her worthiness to be in the store at all. With a sigh that was barely audible yet filled with reluctance, he retrieved the dress and handed it to her. His handoff was not the courteous gesture of a salesperson eager to assist a client, but a reluctant surrender, as if he doubted she belonged there. Still, Lily refused to let his attitude dampen her joy. She carried the dress into the fitting room, determined to prove, if only to herself, that she belonged in that dress as much as anyone else. Inside, she carefully slipped out of her clothes and eased into the gown. As the fabric slid over her shoulders and hugged her figure, she felt a transformation. The mirror reflected back not just a woman but a vision, elegant, powerful, radiant. Her heart swelled with pride and happiness. She twirled slightly, watching how the light caught the shimmering details of the fabric. This was her moment, a rare one where she could see herself as more than her daily roles. But her joy was cut short when Ryan's impatient voice knocked on the fitting room door. "Are you ready yet?" His tone was sharp, like he was waiting to get rid of her rather than help. Taking a steadying breath, Lily stepped out. "This dress is amazing," she said with genuine excitement, giving a small twirl. Her smile was warm, her eyes glowing with joy, hoping, even expecting, a word of acknowledgement. Instead, Ryan's gaze swept over her with judgment. His lips curled into a smirk, but it wasn't kind, it was mocking. "The dress is bold," he remarked, voice laced with derision. "But maybe it doesn't quite suit you." Lily froze, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" she asked, struggling to keep her composure. He shrugged. "This is a very exclusive item. Not everyone can truly wear it." His eyes were cold, his tone condescending, and though his words seemed vague, the implication was sharp and humiliating. Her joy began to collapse. "I don't think it's your place to decide who is suitable for this dress," Lily replied, her voice firmer now, anger simmering beneath her dignity. But Ryan only sneered. "I just want to make sure our items end up with the right people," he said. Then, in a shocking act of arrogance, he stepped closer. Before Lily could react, he reached for the shoulder seam of the dress and yanked it sharply. A tearing sound split the air. Lily's eyes widened as she felt the seam rip, the dress gaping to reveal her bare shoulder. She stood frozen, humiliated, her face burning as nearby customers turned their heads. Some stared, some quickly looked away, but none intervened. Ryan smirked cruelly. "Maybe this style suits you better," he mocked, stepping back as though he had proven a point. Lily's heart pounded, her breath shallow, her fists clenched at her sides. The humiliation was unbearable, her joy shattered in an instant. She fought back tears, her voice trembling but resolute. "Take your hands off me. You will be held accountable for this." Ryan shrugged with smug indifference. "You're free to leave," he said mockingly. "Perhaps another store would suit your style better." Every word was a knife. Lily forced herself to walk out, her back straight though her heart felt crushed. The torn dress exposed her pain, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. Outside the boutique, her knees almost buckled as the weight of the humiliation pressed down on her. Tears welled in her eyes, and just when she thought she could no longer hold them back, she heard a familiar voice, steady, strong, and filled with concern. "Lily." She looked up. There stood Michael, her husband. His eyes fell instantly on the torn dress, and his expression darkened with protective fury. He rushed to her side, placing a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder. "Lily, what happened? Who did this to you?" His voice was low, calm, but laced with rising anger. The dam of her composure broke. The salesman, he tore it. He humiliated me, in front of everyone. Her words broke into sobs she had been holding back. Michael's jaw tightened, his hand gripping hers firmly. His gaze burned with a steady fire. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice like steel. Lily pointed back to the boutique. Her eyes were still wet with tears, but hope flickered there now. She knew her husband well. He was calm, composed, and brilliant, but when someone disrespected her, he became a force to be reckoned with. Michael kissed her forehead gently, a silent promise of protection, then turned and strode into the boutique. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of a storm about to break. The air around him seemed to shift as customers turned to look. And behind the counter, Ryan Fletcher glanced up, unaware that the arrogant smirk on his face was about to be erased forever. The husband's calm. Before the storm, Michael had always been the type of man who carried quiet authority wherever he went. He was not the loudest voice in a room, nor did he need to be. His strength did not come from raised tones or dramatic gestures, but from a stillness that commanded attention. People often described him as the man who could silence chaos with a single look, the man whose very presence seemed to demand respect. Yet those who knew him best understood that his strength was rooted in something deeper than outward control. It came from years of discipline, battles fought silently, and the wisdom to choose when to unleash his power. To Lily, he was her rock. He was the man who balanced her storms with calm, who protected her dignity not by smothering her voice but by amplifying it when the world tried to drown her out. Their marriage had not been built on superficial vows. It had been forged through challenges that tested them both: financial hardships, family struggles, societal prejudices. And yet, through it all, Michael remained unyielding in his devotion to her. To strangers, he was an accomplished professional, respected in his field and admired for his fairness. To Lily, he was far more, her safe place, her fiercest defender, the one man she knew would never allow injustice to stand unchecked. As he stepped into the boutique, his tall frame cutting through the luxurious calm of the store, customers instinctively turned their heads. There was nothing aggressive in his walk, nothing outwardly threatening in his demeanor, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a focus that made the air shift. He spotted Ryan almost immediately behind the counter, arranging scarves with the same smug carelessness that had accompanied his earlier mockery. The contrast between Ryan's arrogance and Michael's quiet storm could not have been sharper. Michael stopped just a few feet away from him, his hands steady at his sides. His posture controlled, but his presence undeniable. Ryan looked up, his eyes meeting Michael's gaze, and for the briefest second, a flicker of unease crossed his face. It was as if some primal instinct within him recognized that he was no longer dealing with a woman he could belittle in silence, but with a man who would not allow such disrespect to go unanswered. Still, Ryan quickly masked his nerves with the same arrogance that had carried him through countless interactions. He straightened his tie and forced a thin smile. "Can I help you?" Ryan asked, his tone deliberately casual, as if Michael was simply another customer. But there was a faint quiver beneath his words, a betraying crack in his confidence. Michael's eyes never left his. "You already did enough," he said, his voice low but resonant, every syllable cutting through the stillness of the store. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to make Ryan's forced composure waver. "You put your hands on my wife." The words were not shouted, but they struck harder than any scream could have. Customers nearby stilled, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ryan's face tightened. He opened his mouth, ready to deflect, to deny, to spin the situation in his favor, but Michael's gaze bore into him with such intensity that he faltered. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Ryan finally muttered, trying to summon a tone of superiority. "Your wife was trying on an exclusive piece, and perhaps she didn't quite understand." "Stop." Michael's voice was calm, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. He raised a single hand, silencing Ryan mid-sentence. "You tore her dress. You humiliated her in public. And you dared to make her feel like she didn't belong here. That is not a misunderstanding. That is an act of disrespect." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, his arrogance wavered as he realized that the man standing before him was not easily dismissed. Yet his pride refused to let him back down. He straightened again, his sneer returning in weak defiance. Sir, with all due respect, not every outfit is meant for. Before he could finish, Michael took a single step closer, closing the space between them. His eyes blazed now, though his voice remained steady. Be very careful about the words you are about to choose, because they will not only reveal who you are, but they will decide what happens to you after this moment. The store seemed to freeze. The soft classical music that had once filled the air now felt like an echo against the heavy silence. Customers had stopped pretending to browse. Some clutched their shopping bags closer. Others watched with wide eyes, waiting to see what would unfold. The tension was palpable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Ryan swallowed, his smirk faltering. But before he could respond, another figure approached. The store manager, a middle-aged woman in a sleek black suit clearly drawn by the shift in atmosphere. She glanced from Michael's stern face to Ryan's rigid posture and immediately sensed something was wrong. Is there a problem here? She asked, her voice polite but cautious. Michael turned his gaze to her, softening only slightly out of respect. Yes, your employee tore this dress while my wife was wearing it. He humiliated her in front of everyone here. His tone did not rise, but the conviction in his voice gave it the gravity of undeniable truth. The manager's eyes widened as she turned sharply toward Ryan. Is this true? Ryan stiffened, his pride scrambling for cover. That's not exactly what happened, he began defensively. She was struggling with the fit and She was not struggling. Michael interrupted, his words cutting cleanly through the air. She was radiant. She was joyful, and he could not stand to see her in that dress because he believed she did not deserve it, so he tore it. The way Michael spoke with absolute certainty left no room for Ryan's twisted narrative. Customers murmured, some nodding, others whispering their disapproval of Ryan's actions. The atmosphere in the boutique shifted entirely, no longer on the side of the salesman but clearly against him. The manager looked shaken, realizing the severity of the accusation. She glanced again at Michael, whose composed authority was unlike anything she had seen in a customer. It was the kind of authority that suggested he was not just any man. It suggested influence, power, someone with the resources to make sure this incident did not disappear quietly. Ryan, sensing the shift, tried to regain control. With all due respect, sir, perhaps your wife misunderstood the context. These dresses are delicate and sometimes seems... Michael stepped forward again, his face inches from Ryan's. His voice dropped even lower, but its intensity sent chills through the room. You did not tear fabric? You tried to tear her dignity, and that is something I will never allow. For the first time, Ryan's confidence crumbled. He stepped back, his hands trembling slightly as he realized the storm he had invited into his own boutique. Michael straightened, turning to the manager. I expect this matter to be addressed immediately. But know this is not just about a dress. This is about respect. My wife deserves the same dignity you would offer any customer who walked through these doors. And if she did not receive it, then this establishment has a much larger problem than one torn gown. The weight of his words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking. The customers, the staff, even the manager stood in silence, each processing the depth of the confrontation. Lily, standing just outside the boutique, felt her chest swell with a mixture of relief and pride. Her husband had not raised his voice, had not lost control, yet he had shaken the very foundation of that store with nothing more than truth and conviction. What Ryan did not yet realize was that Michael was far from finished. This was only the calm before the storm. The true reckoning, the moment when Ryan would learn exactly who Lily's husband was yet to come. Truth and power revealed. The Yao boutique's air had shifted so completely that it felt as though the very walls were listening. Moments earlier, Ryan Fletcher had stood tall in his arrogance, believing he could reduce Lily to silence with his sneers and humiliations. Now that same arrogance faltered as the quiet but undeniable authority of Michael filled every corner of the room. Even the manager, who prided herself on controlling the delicate environment of her luxury store, appeared unsettled, as though she sensed that what had begun as a dispute over fabric had transformed into something far greater. Customers lingered, pretending to browse, but their eyes remained fixed on the unfolding confrontation. There was something magnetic about it, justice demanding to be witnessed. Lily, standing just behind her husband, felt her knees weaken, but not from shame this time. For so long she had trained herself to bear humiliation quietly, to keep her dignity intact by refusing to let others see her pain. But as she watched Michael stand with such unshakable resolve, her heart swelled with courage. For the first time since Ryan had torn the dress, she felt her voice returning. She stepped forward, her torn gown still bearing witness to her humiliation, but her posture now straightened by newfound strength. Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice carried clarity as she spoke. "This man," she said, pointing at Ryan with trembling but determined hands, "looked at me as though I did not belong here. I came into this store full of joy, full of hope that I had finally found something special for myself. And instead of being treated with respect, I was judged, mocked, and humiliated. He tore this dress from my shoulder not because it was faulty, but because he wanted to remind me that in his eyes I was unworthy." The words struck the boutique like a lightning bolt. Customers gasped audibly. The manager's face drained of color, while Ryan's smug expression contorted into one of alarm. He had not expected Lily to speak out so clearly, to voice the truth so directly. He had assumed her silence would protect him, that shame would keep her quiet. But instead, she stood, torn dress and all, declaring the injustice for every witness to hear. Michael turned his head slightly, just enough to meet his wife's eyes. His gaze was filled with pride and a subtle encouragement that only she could read. It was as if he were silently telling her, "Your voice matters. Speak. Do not let anyone take that from you." Ryan, desperate to salvage the narrative, scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. "This is being blown out of proportion. I was only trying to help her see that certain items are reserved for particular clients. We have to protect the exclusivity of our brand." The words fell flat and several customers shook their heads in disgust. One woman whispered to her companion, "Protect exclusivity by tearing a customer's dress? That's not protection, that's cruelty." The murmur spread, the crowd's sympathy tilting sharply toward Lily. Michael, sensing the moment, stepped forward again. His voice, calm but thunderous in its weight, cut through Ryan's excuse. "Do you hear yourself? You speak of exclusivity, as if it gives you the right to decide who is worthy of dignity. You believe the cost of fabric outweighs the value of respect. But what you fail to understand, Mr. Fletcher, is that no brand, no boutique, no store on this earth has the authority to strip a human being of their worth." The customers applauded, softly, some nodding vigorously, others murmuring agreement. Ryan's face reddened, his composure cracking. He turned toward the manager, desperate for support but found none. Her eyes had hardened, her jaw set, as though even she could no longer shield him. "Enough," the manager said, her voice firm but tinged with unease. "Mr. Fletcher, your behavior is unacceptable. I will be reporting this incident to the corporate office." But Michael was not finished. He looked directly at Ryan, his expression unyielding. "You thought my wife was alone. You thought no one would stand by her. But what you don't know, what you couldn't possibly have guessed, is who she is and who she is married to." He paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch, the anticipation build. "You tried to humiliate the wife of a man who has dedicated his entire life to defending the dignity of others. I am Michael Carter, civil rights attorney, advocate, and the moment you put your hands on my wife, you crossed not only a moral line, but a legal one." The revelation struck harder than any physical blow. The murmurs in the boutique swelled into gasps. Several customers immediately recognized the name. Michael Carter was not just another professional. He was a respected figure, known in the city and beyond for his relentless fight against discrimination and injustice. Articles had been written about his victories in court, about his tireless defense of those who had been silenced or mistreated. He was the man corporations feared when whispers of unfair practices surfaced. The man whose presence alone often brought swift changes in policy. And now he was standing here, in this very store, demanding justice for his wife. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His arrogance had been ripped away, leaving only fear and desperation. His hands trembled as he tried to adjust his tie, his voice cracking as he stammered, I didn't know." "That's the problem," Michael cut in sharply. "You never cared to know. You looked at her and decided she wasn't worthy. Not because of her character, not because of her accomplishments, but because of your prejudice. And today, that prejudice has consequences. The room fell silent once more. Customers now openly glared at Ryan, some pulling out their phones, clearly recording the confrontation. The manager's face turned pale, realizing that this incident was spiraling into a public scandal that would spread far beyond the walls of her boutique. Lily, her heart pounding, felt tears rolling down her cheeks. But this time, they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release, of validation, of seeing her pain not only acknowledged but defended with such clarity. She reached for Michael's hand, gripping it tightly, as if drawing strength from the man who had always promised to stand beside her. Michael's gaze swept across the room, from the manager to the gathered customers. Everyone here witnessed what happened. Everyone saw how she was treated. This is not an isolated incident. This is a reflection of an attitude that festers when people in positions of service believe they can decide who is worthy of kindness. But let it be known, my wife's worth is not determined by anyone here. She belongs wherever she chooses to be, and no one will take that from her. The customers erupted in applause this time, no longer holding back. Some even stepped forward, voicing their support. "He's right," one man said loudly. "I saw it myself. That salesman ripped her dress." Another added, "You can't let this slide. This is unacceptable." The voices grew, a collective chorus of solidarity that filled the boutique with undeniable power. Ryan shrank under the weight of it all. His once perfect posture now bent, his once smug face now pale and sweaty. He had thought himself untouchable within the confines of his store, shielded by exclusivity and luxury. But now he realized he was exposed, laid bare before witnesses, stripped of arrogance, facing the consequences of his actions. And standing before him was Michael Carter, the man he never should have underestimated. And Lily, the woman whose dignity had proven stronger than any attempt to tear it down. But as shaken as Ryan was, he had not yet faced the full storm. Michael's words had revealed the truth, but the reckoning, the actual consequences of his cruelty, were only just beginning. Justice in action. The applause from the customers still lingered in the boutique, echoing off its polished walls like a reminder that the tide had shifted irreversibly. What had begun as a private humiliation had transformed into a public reckoning. Ryan Fletcher, who only minutes ago had worn a smirk of superiority, now stood trembling, caught between fear and disbelief. He had underestimated Lily, assuming she would quietly leave with her pain. He had underestimated Michael, assuming he was just another husband whose anger could be placated with a few hollow words. But what terrified him most now was that he had underestimated the power of truth. Michael, still holding Lily's hand, did not let the moment dissolve into mere outrage. He knew better than anyone that anger without action was nothing more than a spark quickly extinguished. Justice required clarity, and it required resolve. He turned to the store manager, who looked pale and unsettled, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as though bracing herself. "This is not just about what my wife endured," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "This is about accountability. Your employee tore a garment, humiliated a customer, and crossed a line that no representative of any establishment should ever cross. And I will not allow this to be swept under a rug of excuses." The manager swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Carter. I assure you this behavior is unacceptable and does not represent our standards. Ryan will be reported immediately and we will—" But Michael raised his hand, silencing her mid-sentence. "Reporting is not enough. This is not about filling out a form for corporate review that disappears into a file no one ever reads. This is about making it clear, here and now, that respect is non-negotiable. You cannot undo what has been done to my wife, but you can decide how you will stand in this moment. Will you defend dignity or will you hide behind procedures?" The manager's eyes darted nervously between Michael, Lily, and Ryan, who now stood with his gaze lowered, lips pressed tight, sweat glistening on his forehead. The weight of the eyes of customers pressed on her too, for the boutique was no longer her private domain of luxury commerce. It was a courtroom of public opinion, and she stood on trial beside her employee. She began, faltering under the intensity of Michael's stare. You are right. Action must be immediate. She turned sharply to Ryan, her voice now stern and commanding. Mr. Fletcher, gather your things. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. The declaration rippled through the boutique, drawing gasps and murmurs of approval. Some customers nodded, others whispered their agreement. Ryan's head snapped up in disbelief, his pride refusing to accept the words. You can't fire me in front of everyone, he spat, his voice shaking. I've been here for years. I've worked with clients you couldn't dream of affording. You need me. The manager's lips tightened. No, she said firmly, her tone resolute. What we need is integrity, and after what you've done, it's clear you no longer represent this brand. Ryan's arrogance faltered once again, his face paling as the reality of the consequences began to settle. He looked around desperately, but the customers' eyes were cold, their sympathy long gone. His gaze landed on Lily, and for a fleeting moment he seemed to want to speak, perhaps to justify himself, perhaps to apologize. But the strength in her eyes silenced him. She stood tall despite her torn dress, dignity radiating from her in a way no insult could diminish. He looked away quickly, shame finally catching him. Michael, however, was not yet finished. He stepped closer, his presence towering without aggression, his voice firm but controlled. Mr. Fletcher, I am not a man who revels in the downfall of another. But understand this, every action carries weight. When you chose to demean my wife, when you tore her dress, when you mocked her as though she did not belong, you thought there would be no cost. That belief has ended today. What happens next, whether you learn from this or repeat it elsewhere, will define the kind of man you choose to be. But know this, your name, your actions will follow you, and I will make sure this record is not erased. Ryan flinched, his lips parting to argue, but the words died in his throat. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time ever, he felt the sting of true accountability. Security arrived quietly, 2 men in dark suits who had been summoned by the manager moments earlier. They flanked Ryan, their expressions professional but firm. Sir, you need to leave, one of them said. Ryan's protests were weak now, muttered fragments of defiance that carried no weight. Within moments, he was escorted out of the boutique, his exit watched by customers whose eyes carried not pity but disdain. The smirk that once defined him was gone, replaced by the hollow expression of a man who had finally realized that arrogance cannot shield one forever. As the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the boutique shifted once more. A murmur of relief spread among the customers, some offering words of encouragement to Lily, others expressing their admiration for Michael's composure. The manager, clearly rattled but determined to salvage what remained of her store's reputation, turned to Lily with an apologetic bow. Mrs. Carter, she said softly, on behalf of our establishment, I offer you my sincerest apologies. What happened today was unforgivable. Please allow us to replace the dress at no cost, or provide anything you may desire as a gesture of our regret. Lily's eyes, still glistening but now steady, met the manager's. For a long moment she considered the offer, but then with a quiet strength that surprised even herself, she shook her head. This is not about a dress. What I wanted was not fabric or shimmer. What I wanted was to be treated with dignity, the same as anyone else. No apology can erase what happened in front of these witnesses. What you must give me is not compensation but change. Ensure that no woman, no customer ever stands where I stood today. The words carried more weight than any legal threat could have. Customers nodded, visibly moved. The manager's throat tightened, her eyes softening with guilt and understanding. You have my word, she whispered. We will change. Michael placed a protective hand on Lily's back, pride swelling in his chest. His wife, who only an hour earlier had walked into this boutique to treat herself to a dress, now stood as a beacon of strength. Her humiliation transformed into a demand for justice, not just for herself, but for anyone who might follow. In that moment, the boutique was no longer simply a store. It was a stage where a lesson had been etched into the hearts of everyone present. Respect was not a luxury to be granted selectively, but a right to be honored universally. But as Lily and Michael prepared to leave, the lesson was not yet complete. The consequences for Ryan Fletcher had only just begun. and the world beyond these walls would soon learn of what had transpired here today. Respect restored, and a lesson for all. The moment the heavy glass doors of the boutique closed behind Ryan Fletcher, the air inside felt lighter, though it still carried the weight of what had transpired. Customers moved about again, but the energy was no longer the calm detachment of luxury shopping. It was charged, transformed into something more meaningful. Strangers who had come only to browse dresses and handbags had just witnessed a public act of humiliation turn into a declaration of dignity, and though they had no personal connection to Lily, they found themselves moved by her strength and by the unwavering defense of her husband. It was as if the store had become a place where everyone had been reminded of what truly mattered: respect, integrity, and the courage to demand both. Lily stood still for a moment, her hands brushing the torn seam of the blue dress. Hours earlier, she had entered this boutique filled with excitement, eager to rediscover her confidence through a garment that reflected her spirit. Now she realized the true transformation had not come from the shimmer of fabric or the cut of a gown, but from what had happened when she refused to allow humiliation to silence her. She had walked into this place seeking beauty. She was leaving with something far more powerful: validation, strength, and a reminder of her own unshakable worth. Michael glanced down at her. His expression softened now, though his protective fire still burned quietly beneath the surface. He reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers, grounding her in the same way he always had. "Are you ready to leave, love?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the tenderness that balanced the authority he had wielded moments before. Lily nodded, but before they could move, several customers approached them. One woman, elegant in her own right with pearls around her neck, touched Lily's arm lightly. "You were so brave," she said earnestly. "I saw what he did. I saw how he looked at you, and you stood tall, even when he tried to break you. Don't ever forget that." Another customer, a young man holding shopping bags, added, "What happened here shouldn't have happened to anyone, but the way you both handled it. I'll remember it. Thank you for speaking up. You gave the rest of us courage too." Their words filled Lily's heart with warmth. For so long she had learned to endure quietly, to protect her dignity in silence. But now she realized that her voice had power not only for herself, but for others as well. She gave a small smile, her tears finally drying, and replied softly, "No one deserves to be made to feel small. If my voice helped remind us all of that, then something good came from today." The manager, still shaken but determined, approached once more. She held herself with humility, her eyes filled with genuine regret. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said, her voice steadier now, "on behalf of this store and the entire brand, I want to extend not just an apology, but a promise. Policies will change. Training will change. I will personally ensure that what happened here today never happens again, not in this boutique and not in any of our branches. Your courage exposed what we overlooked, and for that, we owe you more than words." Michael studied her carefully, his silence pressing her to continue. "We will also issue a formal apology to you, Mrs. Carter," the manager added, her voice sincere. "If you wish, we can hold a meeting with corporate leadership, and your experience will be the foundation of a new policy. I know this doesn't erase what you endured, but it can prevent others from enduring the same." Lily listened, and after a long moment she nodded. "Then let your promise be the true apology," she said quietly. "No gift, no replacement, no luxury can erase disrespect. Only change can." Her words resonated through the boutique like a final gavel strike, settling the matter with grace. The manager bowed her head, visibly humbled, and stepped back to give them space. As Michael and Lily finally turned to leave, customers parted respectfully, some even clapping softly once more. It was not applause for a spectacle, but for a triumph of dignity, for the reminder that one person's courage could ripple outward and awaken the conscience of many. Outside the boutique, the mall's atmosphere seemed strangely different to Lily. The golden light still glowed. The elegant displays still shimmered, but now she looked at them through new eyes. She had entered this place believing she needed fabric to feel powerful. She was leaving knowing her power had never depended on anything sold within those walls. Michael, ever attentive, noticed her contemplative silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his thumb brushing her hand as they walked side by side. Lily smiled faintly. her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and newfound pride. "I came here looking for a dress that would make me feel strong," she admitted. "But I didn't need the dress. I needed to remember that I already was." Michael's heart swelled at her words. He stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her fully. "You have always been strong, Lily. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. The dress didn't give you that. It only reflected what was already there. And today you showed not just me, not just this store, but everyone watching who you really are." Lily's eyes glistened again, but this time with gratitude rather than pain. She reached up, cupping his face gently. "And you reminded me I never stand alone." They embraced briefly, their quiet love louder than any words could express. Passers-by glanced at them, some recognizing Michael Carter, others simply seeing a couple bound by something rare and unshakable. But as they continued walking, the world outside the boutique was already shifting. News spread quickly in the digital age, and some of the customers had shared what they had witnessed on social media. Videos of the confrontation were circulating, with captions that highlighted Lily's bravery and Michael's unwavering defense. Comments poured in, praising the couple for standing up against disrespect and turning humiliation into a moment of truth. What had begun as an attempt to tear down Lily's dignity was becoming a story of empowerment spreading far beyond the walls of the mall. By the time they reached their car, Lily's phone was already buzzing with messages, friends, colleagues, even strangers reaching out to express support and admiration. She glanced at the screen, astonished, before slipping it back into her purse. "It seems," she said with a small laugh, "that people are listening." Michael smiled knowingly, as they should. Stories like this remind people of what we must all demand from one another: respect. And sometimes it takes one voice, one stand, to awaken many. Lily leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "Then let this be that stand," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been made to feel small." Michael kissed the top of her head, his arm wrapping protectively around her. Together they drove away, not in defeat, not in shame, but in triumph. They carried with them a lesson that had been forged in the fire of humiliation and quenched by the waters of justice. That dignity was not something granted by others, but something inherent, something that could be defended, reclaimed, and celebrated. And for every person who would one day hear their story, the message would be clear. Respect is not a privilege of the wealthy or the few. It is a right that belongs to all. To deny it is to invite accountability. To uphold it is to build a world where no woman, no man, no human being ever has to fight to be seen as worthy. That day, Lily had gone to the mall to buy a dress. Instead, she had walked away with something far greater, a reminder to herself and to everyone who bore witness that no seam torn by arrogance could ever rip apart the fabric of true dignity.